Welcome to Exhuming the Truth, a podcast dedicated to cold cases, missing persons, systemic injustices, and the art of forensic science that seeks answers when silence remains. My name is Asha, and I am a forensic scientist and a criminologist, and in each episode we examine the evidence, the systems, and the human stories often left behind. This isn't just about true crime. It's about truth, it's about accountability, and it's about giving a voice to those who deserve to be heard. Thank you for being here, and let's jump right in. Hi guys, and welcome to today's episode. We'll do a little tiny housekeeping just because I am so excited / nervous that I'm going to be getting married in a little over 4 weeks, and yeah, it's all starting to feel a little bit real right now, but I will, of course, update everybody with what days I will be working and what days I'll be having off a little closer to the event. I do plan on recording ahead of time so that podcast episodes will still come out, even though I will be in my little wedding bubble. Unfortunately, I do not have any news or any updates in regards to our charity registration. It has been going on for so long now. You guys are being super patient. I am running out of patience, but I'm doing my best. They have come back and forward a few times asking me to amend things and do this and that, which I've done. Look, we can just hope for the best. At the end of the day, if we don't get approved as a charity, it doesn't mean we can't keep going forward. It just means I'll have to find another way for funding sustainability, I guess. But yeah, I will keep you updated as I'm updated. I've got no news in the last few weeks, unfortunately, but we'll do our best. We are still so incredibly super busy, and we're very grateful to be busy, but it might just take a little moment to get back and respond to everybody. I'm doing my best. Of course, we have our lovely editor, Josh. He's been helping me out, so shout out to him. Thank God for him. But today's episode, we do have an active missing person in New South Wales. So please listen carefully. Please share his name and his story and help us help his family. They are so desperate for help and for answers. And I would really love if we could gather around them or rally around them, I guess, and do our best for them as well as we have with all of our other families. So let's get right into it. Where is Scott Hayden? Today's episode is about a man who didn't just simply vanish. This is the story of Scott Colin Hayden, a 45-year-old son and a brother whose disappearance raises serious questions about mental health vulnerability, environmental risk, and whether early opportunities to intervene were actually missed. This episode discusses psychosis, mental health crisis, and disappearance. Listener discretion is advised. Who was Scott Hayden? Scott Hayden was born on the 20th of May in 1979, and at the time of his disappearance, Scott was unemployed and living with his mum and dad. He had a structured but quiet routine, going to the gym and riding his motorbike or his push bike and spending time watching religious videos. Scott had a documented history of psychosis. In September of 2024, he was admitted to Manning Rural Hospital, and sometime before late May of 2025, Scott had stopped taking his prescribed medication. He also regularly used marijuana, which, when combined with untreated psychosis, can significantly increase the risk of disorientation, paranoia, and impaired judgment, as well as vulnerability. And this context matters because we're not labeling Scott, but we're understanding the risk environment that he was navigating at the time of his disappearance. So let's go to Thursday, the 29th of May, 2025. And I've labelled this as the first warning sign because on Thursday evening, around 6 p.m, Scott experiences a psychotic episode at home. He became agitated and he raised his voice. And recognising that the situation might escalate, Scott's parents actually made the difficult but caring decision that they were going to leave the house temporarily to give him some space. And what they did was jumped in the car and they drove about 15 minutes away to stay with their daughter. And at this point in time, Scott is very much alive. He was at home and he was known to be unwell and in a lot of discomfort at that point. Now, come the next day, which is Friday the 30th of May 2025, I've labelled this as maybe a missed intervention because by early to mid-afternoon on the Friday, the concern within the family grew exponentially, and Scott's sister actually attends Tari Police Station and requested a welfare check on Scott. The family is understandably worried about Scott's mental state at that moment in time, and the police reportedly record the matter as a domestic violence incident rather than a mental health welfare check. And no further action was actually taken by them at that time. So this decision became a critical point of contention in this whole saga. The family ultimately lodged a complaint with the Law Enforcement Conduct Commission. Now, at around 3:10 p.m. on that Friday, Scott's sisters were collecting their kids from school, and while they were doing so, they happened to drive past Scott on the road as he was returning home from Taree. Now, this is the last confirmed sighting of Scott by his family, and later that afternoon/evening, Scott leaves home again. Now, let's get into the drive, which I've labelled as into isolation with a question mark. There's so many questions around Scott's disappearance. Now, bank records show Scott purchases fuel and he makes a small cash withdrawal that day. He travelled toward, now I'm probably going to pronounce this wrong, Gloucester, which is spelled Gloucester. So this area, Gloucester, is along Bucket's Way, and then he travels onto Thunderbolts Way, which is actually a remote route, especially after recent flooding around that time. Now, around 9 to 9:30 p.m, Scott actually encounters a washed-out bridge approximately 24 kilometres from Barrington. Now, flooding had occurred, like I just said, about a week earlier to this time, so he was actually unable to cross that bridge, so Scott turns the vehicle around and he drives his vehicle into a driveway of a farmer's property where his car actually got bogged in the mud. Now, at this point, Scott is described as being incredibly agitated. He's obviously faced a couple of roadblocks, and this local farmer and an Origin energy worker attend the scene where Scott's vehicle is. And what happens next is deeply concerning. Now, Scott reportedly swims across the river barefoot, wearing only boxers, looking for a place to sleep. Now, there are tracks indicating that he did swim back across the river. Eventually, Scott manages to free his car from the mud, and he's damaged the farmer's front fence in the process of doing so. Scott then drives only a few metres, he parks his vehicle, and he appears to sleep in the vehicle at that time. Now, the front seat is completely reclined back and the hazard lights and heater are left on, which completely drain the battery. Now, this is not the behaviour of someone planning a long journey. Come the next day, Saturday the 31st of May 2025, Scott is no longer in his vehicle. Now, his wallet and his ID are left behind in the car, and police later retain both the vehicle and Scott's phone. Now, at some point in time that weekend, either the Saturday or the Sunday, a local store owner by the name of Michael, he reported serving a barefoot man who bought lunch. Crucially, this sighting is not reported to Crime Stoppers until around 6 weeks later, and we know what happens here with that. There is not going to be any CCTV available in order to confirm this, because as we know, they run on a 7 to 14 day timetable, so that footage has been completely wiped. Now, in regards to the searches and investigations here, we had emergency services, including the SES, and also the fire brigade, conduct 4 days worth of searches in this area. They found absolutely no confirmation of Scott or any indication that he was in that area, and the family later actually organised a specialist search dog group from Sydney, and they come along with their dogs and, of course, also deploy their drones, but still nothing. Now, family of Scott actually searched an area close by called Tibbuc, Tibbuc, and they stated that they did so around 15 times, and during these searches they observed something troubling, which happened to be the battery bolts sitting on top of the car battery in Scott's vehicle. So in discussion about this, the family actually believe that this is suggesting that someone might have actually attempted to help Scott out. He could have flagged someone down saying he had a flat battery and they've attempted to help. Now, police have actually disputed this interpretation, but there appears to be no clear photographic documentation released to resolve this discrepancy whatsoever. But of course, the family know Scott and they know him best, so keep that in mind with the battery, because it is a bit odd that the bolts were sitting on top of the battery at that time. It just does look like he has had a third party kind of try and intervene and maybe assist. So over the course of time, the family have got heaps of unconfirmed sightings in areas like Woodford, Queensland, Coffs Harbour and many other places. And the police actually reportedly possess CCTV footage from at least some of the locations, but they're refusing to release it to the family, which is very, very odd. And as we know, this does nothing except fuel mistrust. These sightings movement or misidentification, and without transparency, the families are left in limbo here. Like, what are they to do? So, of course, this is a different disappearance to others that we've covered, and there's a lot going on here and several critical pieces of evidence that require preservation and transparency, and I want to go through those with you. Let's start with Scott's vehicle, with his car. Okay, so the seat position, it was reclined all the way back. As we know, that would suggest somebody maybe taking a rest or having a nap. The battery condition, that was completely drained. The hazard lights were in use, the heater was in use. There was damage from the fence from the farmer's property, mud on the tyres where he was stuck. Of course, Scott's phone. We can do some forensic imaging, go through deleted data, location history, battery status, last activity. All these things count towards little bits and pieces of the puzzle to help the family solve this and get answers for their son and brother. Of course, we have bank records and CCTV. We have the CCTV that the police have that will not disclose to the family for whatever reason they're withholding that for. We've, of course, got the fuel purchase timing and the route confirmation. This all helps us build that very factual timeline, which is essential in missing persons cases. We have witness statements. So, of course, the farmer, which is where Scott drove his vehicle, and at that time, there happened to be an Origin Energy worker. So those two could corroborate their statements to help us build that timeline. And we have the store owner, which had the exact times and details on his statement as well. Now, of course, we also have river tracks. Now, like we spoke about, there was flooding in the area, but the photos, GPS tagged images and environmental analysis is all going to sort of beef up the analysis a bit and give us a bit more direction. The police search records, where they conducted their searches and when, and what areas were actually excluded. As I spoke about today, you might not be familiar with, but I did have a quick chat about finding negative information, which means information that's might feel like it's not contributing to the bigger picture, but in actual fact, it is. So if we look somewhere and we don't find anything, we would call that a negative search result. But that would also tick off an area that we've done so we can move on and narrow down the search. It's very, very important. And excluding things is very important for defining a proximity. Now, I've actually noted a bunch of red flags in this case, and I want to talk about them and why they matter. I have had the pleasure, I always say this, with a heavy heart, that I have the pleasure of working with these families. I've been working with Scott's mum, Jeanette. She is a lovely, lovely lady, and it is a pleasure to work with her, but in these circumstances, it's obviously with a very heavy heart. and I have gone through this with her and got approval, obviously, to speak about this. But it's just, I want people's minds ticking and I want this story shared. Now, the red flags I've noted. We've got the untreated psychosis, which obviously significantly increases the risk of harm or exploitation. I don't like the way in many cases that police will write something off as a mental health crisis and therefore won't search any further. I think that's absolutely ridiculous. The welfare check request was not acted upon. That is a huge red flag to me. Again, that is kind of like, somebody has shown up with concern and they haven't acted on it. I cannot understand why they wouldn't do that. Another area of concern is the fact that he left his wallet and ID behind. This could suggest that he didn't want to be found or wasn't planning on getting lost, essentially. The hazard lights and the heater left on overnight, the barefoot travel in the cold, flood-affected terrain, and that also kind of trickles into the environmental dangers and the washed out bridges and rivers and the fact that he tried to swim across there. What was he trying to get to? Why did he want to go over there? The conflicting interpretations of vehicle evidence. Obviously, the massive red flag here is the withheld CCTV footage. And that, of course, again, ripple effect into the breakdown of trust between the family and police. Now, of course, none of these alone are going to prove what happened, but if we collate them together, they do show a man who is in clear crisis, who needed help, and he disappeared in conditions where survival was already compromised. And should they have acted on that welfare check, would he be missing? I honestly don't think so. Scott could be lost or injured in remote terrain. He could have been in a vulnerable position or exploited. There's just so many things that could have gone wrong here. And what is clear about it is that Scott didn't disappear without warning here. Like I said, there was a welfare check requested. Why was that not carried out? Now, as Scott's mum, Jeanette, has told me, the areas of concern that we're talking about here are quite remote, small towns. So you may not have heard of them. But if by chance you did, you do know where they are, or you happen to be passing through or know somebody who is in the area in late May or early June, and you happen to see something that might match the description of Scott, your information still very much matters. You can call Crime Stoppers, you can contact us. If you do contact Crime Stoppers, you can just reference Scott Colin Hayden. And of course, if you're listening and someone you love is in a mental health crisis, early intervention saves lives. And I know I'm saying that, it's leaving a very bitter taste in my mouth when I'm saying that, because early intervention does save lives. But what's happened here is there has been an attempt at early intervention and it hasn't been followed through. And I would like to encourage people to continue to push. If you've called for a welfare check on somebody, I want you to follow that up right away. I don't care how annoying you sound. I want you to call that same person you reported it to and ask them if they've checked. Ask them what they're doing or what they have done or what the plan is, and hold them accountable for either not doing their job or doing it too slowly. We're going to do several episodes on Scott Hayden and try and keep you up to date as best we can. I really want you guys to act on this one and share it and ask questions. Let's get talking. Let's get this case moving along. Jeanette and Scott's family really rely upon our help. And like I've told you guys before, you never know whose share of a story or a name or an image is going to reach the right person who might have a piece of the puzzle that will help get closure and answers. It's so incredibly important. And outside of the fact that Scott is missing, and this is just incredibly sad, this is also a huge and disgusting reminder of how systems respond, or actually, I'll backtrack, of how systems fail to respond when mental health, policing and isolation collide. Scott Hayden, of course, deserves answers. He deserves to be found, and his family deserves transparency. And this story really, really needs to be heard. I'm going to share some images. I hope you share those along with your posts on Facebook. talk to your family, your friends. Let's help spread the word about Scott and do our best for the Hayden family. Thank you so much for being here. Let us know if you have any other questions or things that you want to hear more about to do with Scott and his case. You can either text, call, email, DM, write on our posts. I will do my best to get back to you as quick as I can. And thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you have enjoyed it here. If so, you can stay up to date across all social media platforms. You can subscribe for less than $2 a month on our Facebook page to help us help families across Australia. My name is Asha, and this is Exhuming the Truth.